I am Alan Bliss. I'm the CEO of the Jacksonville Historical Society. The Jacksonville Historical Society was established here in Jacksonville in 1929 on the anniversary of Jacksonville's Great Fire. We are not just Jacksonville's oldest, but its only citywide public history organization. No one else does what we do in Jacksonville, preserving this incredible, this complicated, great, big city of many, many stories. We do it not just to look back at the past, but also to focus our eye on the future. When we know something about the place where we live, whether it's our house, our block, our street, our neighborhood, our city and state and nation, when we know something about its past, we realize that we are the stewards of that place in the present moment, and that focuses our attention, our thinking on our responsibility to that place's future, right? It makes us good citizens, and that's the value of historical knowledge and historical understanding. And sustaining and perpetuating that and strengthening citizenship in Jacksonville is our mission. It's why there is a Jacksonville Historical Society. We're grateful to all of you for being here with us this evening. We're grateful for the support that we receive from the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville, from the Dolores Parr Weaver Foundation, from numerous corporate partners, most notable among them, the Haskell organization, which is represented here in person this evening by Preston H. Haskell. Preston, if you are in a position to stand briefly so that people will be able to recognize you. Thank you. There are some other Haskell representatives in the audience. Alan Wilson, are you here as well? Alan, I think I saw you stand up briefly so people can down. And both of these guys with roots in design and architecture and construction, and both great Jacksonville citizens, as there are so many here this evening. I'm so thankful to the staff and volunteers of the Jacksonville Historical Society who make this evening's event possible. Kate Halleck, Chief of Staff and Communications Director. At the welcome table and at the refreshment station, thanks to Georgia Probatic, JHS librarian, June Paula, JHS volunteer, and Nancy Andy, who is the coordinator for our Merrill Museum House, the James Merrill Historical Museum House right next door. Thanks to all of them. There are a number of Jacksonville Historical Society board members here present this evening. Would each of you who are present just stand up so that people can recognize you? Thank you. And we are grateful to those of you, all of you who are members of the Jacksonville Historical Society. If you are, thank you. If you are not yet, we can remedy that condition this evening with a form from the welcome table at the front. And if you don't have a pen in your pocket, we could probably even fix that. But failing that, please visit our website at jaxhistory.org, jaxhistory.org. Your membership really matters. If you agree with us that Jacksonville's history matters, then join us, please, in sustaining that effort. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Timothy Gilmore, a Jacksonville native and a frequent presenter here at the JHS Speaker Series. Dr. Gilmore is the author of 22 books, including his latest, A Box Broken Open, available to be signed by the author at the table up front. He has written 4 works for the stage. He's produced at Florida State College at Jacksonville, where he teaches writing and received a 2018 Distinguished Faculty Award. The Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville named Dr. Gilmore the 2018 Literary Artist of the Year. In that same year, he served with me on the Jacksonville City Council Civil Rights History Task Force and received the city's Melody Star Ambition Community Service Award. Dr. Gilmore holds a PhD in English from the University of Florida. Go Gators! He is also a founder of Jacks by Jacks, a literary arts festival built on the theme of Jacksonville writers writing Jacksonville. He's the writer and creator of www.jackspsychogeo.com, a project that explores the centrality of the South in more than 650 nonfiction narratives from his hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. Before we hear from my colleague, Dr. Gilmore, let's hear a few words about the actual subject of this evening's program. Ted Pappas, the architect, is known and has been for quite some time to Jacksonville Historical Society board member Christina Brower Barnes, who also has architecture running through her veins and deep in her DNA. Chris, would you say a few words, please?
Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here, because I can't imagine anything greater than to honor Ted tonight. He truly is one of the greatest architects of Jacksonville's time. And the way I know him is that when I was a little girl, I think I was 5, not quite 6, it was 1960, and he came to work for my father, Bob Broward, right out of college. And so that was his first introduction to working in an architectural firm. My father was very boisterous, had a bit of a temper, and they would say that they loved it when I came to visit because he would not cuss, he wouldn't yell, and I loved coming to get to see the big boys, which is what I call Ted and Herschel Shepherd and some others that were working there. But I'm so honored that I get to be here tonight, and thank you, Ted, for everything you've done, and especially the renovations to this beautiful church that we're in this evening. Thank you so much.
This church, a place of such dignity and grace and history that's keeping our heads dry on this moist evening in September in Jacksonville, was designed by the influential 19th century architect Robert Schuyler, also the designer of a number of the other Episcopal sanctuaries of the St. Johns River Valley, many in the Carpenter Gothic style, including beautiful examples such as the one at Fort George, up on Fort George Island, the church called St. George. Mr. Schuyler's probably most recognizable works and distinctive include St. Peter's Episcopal Church, still serving as a consecrated Episcopal sanctuary up in Fernandina Beach, and the building that we stand in here. This building narrowly escaped demolition in the 1990s. It was rescued by the city of Jacksonville in a project led by then City Council President Matthew Carlucci, with great support from Dolores Barr Weaver and from numerous donors and contractors and people who put their shoulder to the wheel and rescued and restored this. And that project was guided by Ted Pappas. It's one of the many things on which he has left his lasting fingerprints in Jacksonville. We owe so much to Ted, and Matt Carlucci, by the way, told me this afternoon that he doesn't think this project could have happened without Ted. Matt would have been pleased to claim credit for recruiting you, Ted, to this project. He said it probably wasn't him, but he'd like to say it was. Not only did Ted oversee the architectural work associated with this restoration, but he also designed this elegant, thoughtful, graceful annex that is appended to the southeast corner of the old sanctuary and is added to the property with such grace that you barely notice that it wasn't created in the first place by Mr. Schuyler. It's another example of the way that Ted has deployed his talents in the service of really worthwhile projects in this city. So, more about him now from Dr. Gilmore. Tim, please come up and take this microphone away from me.
Thanks, folks. It's such an honor to be here. Assuming and hoping this clicker works. It was such an honor to visit the places that Ted Pappas designed with him and with his son, my good friend Mark Pappas, and to write this book. Several people have asked me over the last several years why I write about bad people so often. It makes sense to some of you. I've written about good people before too, but with Box Broken Open, the architecture of Ted Pappas, I can say I've written not just about a brilliant architect, but a truly good and wonderful human being. So, some many faces of Ted. Ted grew up on Ernest Street in the North Riverside Greek community. Here we see Ted at several distinct points in his life. Here's Ted showing a rendering for the Youth Development Center for Boys on River Road. That's right here. There's Ted standing in his headquarters at 100 Riverside Avenue, just the other side of that, the Milne Pappas building. There's Ted, and yes, that's Prince Charles in 1988 at the AIA conference in Pittsburgh. My favorite is the center bottom picture because it's Ted just being silly. It's an image not meant for publication. Oops. He's at the Regency Library, which he designed in the 1970s, and there's Ted's signature. You can see he was already playing with design in every aspect of his life in my mom's 1952 yearbook. I want to include everything, and I've cut out so much for time constraints. I'm going to save some time at the end of this for Mark Pappas to talk to you for a few minutes about his father's leadership, and of course, for Ted himself to answer some questions, and I'm sure there are many. All right, good. So, Ted in 1968 is a young architect whose parents had emigrated from Greece, and he'd been chosen to design Jacksonville's new Greek Orthodox sanctuary. It was his first solo commission. St. John the Divine's former sanctuary with its 3 crosses and 2 fish-scale pattern stamped metal onion domes rising over Union and Laura Streets downtown had been built in 1902 as congregation at Habat Chesed Synagogue. By the way, there are old newspaper photos of Taylor Hardwick with those onion domes after demolition. Captions say that he salvaged them and took them away somewhere. So if anybody has any idea where they are, please let us know. When the congregation moved from downtown in 1968, by the way, the icon screen, which you can see in the bottom center photograph, moved with it. That was built by woodworker and cabinet maker George Doro. Doro is best remembered now, unfortunately maybe, for the George Doro Fixture Company building, which stood right across the street from where we are and was demolished last year. There are some apartments coming up with Doro in the name. Hopefully I'll get the hang of this. Okay, good. All right. In his design for St. John the Divine, Ted is working as he always would with new ideas by incorporating ancient designs into them. The facade emphasizes the vertical with its high steps and tall columns, a contemporary expression of classical Greek temples. He made Roman barrel vaults modern by using reinforced concrete and cantilevering them over the entrance. The image on the far side is of the first Easter services at the church. This would be the start of a career designing contemplative spaces, churches, shrines, libraries. Ted describes Resurrection Catholic Church as looking like a ship's prow, and it does. When Mark was little and his father was designing the church, Mark called it the spaceship. That works too. What you'd think is concrete here is actually stucco. Plasters gave the exterior a rough texture, not sand finished, and the walls were left unpainted. From the rear entrance, the roof line starts low until slowly upward. Then, as it approaches the altar and the apse, the angles dart skyward, resulting in a corner centered on a series of tiered triangles pointing straight up and into the cross on top. It's a graceful paradox. The church has the gravitas and the mass, no pun intended, of concrete, but it soars. The magic of St. Photios, Greek Orthodox National Shrine in St. Augustine, is the way it makes harmony of oppositions. It uses the box, breaks it open, as one of Ted's favorite sayings has it, then makes of it a frame for its interior arches. Specifically, that box is the reconstructed Avero House, one of a handful of houses remaining in St. Augustine's historic district that predate 1821, when Florida first became a territory of the United States. The Avero House was the place in St. Augustine where Greeks first worshipped. The shrine uses several of Ted's favorite themes. Not only does he love the box broken open and the arch, but he's fascinated with intimate scale and loves to combine forward-thinking design with a deep appreciation of the past. Of all Ted's designs, it's also one of the best examples of placemaking. Deep inside the shrine, standing in the chapel, it's hard to believe that St. George Street, with its hundreds of tourists buying postcards, sunglasses, and Panama hats, is right outside. It almost didn't happen. 7 years before Archbishop Iacovos dedicated that shrine, a dramatic meeting at St. Augustine's government house rang with phrases like calamity and no compromise. By September 1975, it appeared the shrine would not be built. Ted's initial design was deemed too modern, too contemporary, and in fact, too Greek. To members of the historic St. Augustine Preservation Board, even as Pappas drew up different designs, according to their initial suggestions, political alliances formed on either side. September 19th, 1975, headline in the St. Augustine Record announced St. Photios' chapel plan is rejected. It said hopes dimmed during a no-compromise meeting at the government house between board members and spokesman for Archbishop Iacovos of New York City. I'll never forget it, Ted told me. Father Hondras attended. It was quiet through the whole session until the end. When the leaders of the meeting asked attendees for comments, Hondras said, "I'm here to give you a message from Archbishop Iacovos in New York." He said, "If this project doesn't get approved, we're pulling the Orthodox Church out of St. Augustine." It's kind of Godfather sounding. The Greek Orthodox Church had never before dedicated a national shrine in the Americas. The Avero House was the oldest existing locus of Greek worship in the Americas. The Archdiocese figured the town that bills itself as the oldest in the United States couldn't refuse the recognition the shrine offered when it came down to the wire. The Jacksonville Housing Authority commissioned the 15-story Hogan's Creek Tower in 1974. Ted's brutalist design echoes architecture like Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation, built in 1952 in Marseille. Unlike Pappas's best-known brutalist building, which we'll look at in just a second, the Mary Singleton Senior Center, with its wall planks shaped on redwood forms and poured concrete, this tower rose from precast concrete sections. The Singleton Center is an elegant paradox. Here, concrete feels natural as wood. Lines flow like the trees in a forest, and the earth itself rises in tiers and terraces through foundations towards skylights. Standing beneath hexagonal crisscrossings in the central hallway, Ted tells me, a regular grid, of course, is 90 degrees. You can work with a 45-degree grid, but the reason for a 30-60 is that it flows. There are no square corners. Mary Lee Pappas says she loves the building because its walls feel like trees, while from above it looks like a star. I can't imagine anything more poetic being said about a building. Here in the Singleton Center, motion is an architectural material. Concrete doesn't weigh heavily here. It flows. The emphasis is on its pouring. The two most commonly used materials on Earth are concrete and water. The term brutalism has nothing to do with being brutal. So people who wish to, quote, save its legacy by renaming it heroism, this is true, build on a faulty premise. The term dates to architectural critic Rainer Banham's 1955 essay, The New Brutalism, and refers to Breton brut, French for raw concrete, and its use as material by architect Le Corbusier. Not only does the Singleton Center accommodate trees that were here before it, not only do the concrete forms show the natural formations of redwood, but the structure's geometry relates to the Kabbalistic tree of life. When you rub your fingers along the walls in these halls, you touch the textures of ancient redwood trees. Run your eyes after your hands across the flows of wood grain, the perfect imperfections of knots, of crevices, and arcs. These walls are concrete poured onto redwood forms with gaps in between. After each pour, the ends are knocked off, the concrete redwood planks fitted together. The result is a brutalism that grew like a forest. I keep telling people, so I guess this is my go-to metaphor, that you could throw a baseball from one of Ted Pappas's historic preservation or renovation projects downtown to another. As with everything tonight, this overview of his historic renovation projects does not give it justice. It's just a sampler. 1983, Ted restored the first National Bank building, also called the Old Bisbee Building, 57 West Bay Street. Built in 1901 and 02 in the frenzy of downtown reconstruction that followed the Great Fire, designed by Gottfried L. Norman of Atlanta. Notice the floral ornamentation beneath the dentil cornice, including alternating repetitions of anthemia, the palmette motif with radiating petals so often found on the antefix in ancient Greek and Roman architecture, which Ted made the symbol for his firm and used directly in his Beaches Library, designed the same year, we'll see later. Councilman Clyde Red Cannon operated a barber shop as his political headquarters in the Doty Building. Men Power stopped by for a trim and a shave in the scuttlebutt. Transactions happened, official and otherwise. This 3-story building belonged to Ted's Uncle John. 1968, it was crumbling. Ted was ready to strike out on his own. With its arabesque railings on balconies on the second and third floors, the Doty apartment building had always reminded him of New Orleans. Ted kept his offices here until he moved into the Milne Pappas building in the early 1980s. Ted was first hired for restorative work at the Seminole Club in 1977 and again in 1981. Seminole Club began in 1887 as a prominent place for the city's biggest wigs, its top political and business leaders to meet and dine, negotiate, and drink and deal. Presidents and presidential candidates met here, and just down diagonally in what's now James Weldon Johnson Park. Today, it houses somebody. Sweet Peas. After holding classes elsewhere, Duval High School inhabited a new red brick building with limestone trim designed by architect Wilbur Bacon Camp in 1908. 1920 and 22, the school added wings with dental corbelling, balustrades, and arches designed by Melanie Greeley and Roy Benjamin to either side. After Ted's renovation, the building became Stevens Duval Apartments for the elderly in 1980. By the way, some of those high school students who graduated in 1927, the school's last operating year, 53 years before, became its residents. They didn't get away from high school. The school's last student, born a year before the building opened, died in 2011, 102 years old. 1983, Ted restored the Jacksonville Free Public Library, built between 1903 and 05, designed by Henry John Clutho. Charles Pillins III shook my hand in the lobby, walked me to a conference room, told me what the library was like in the 1960s before the Bedell law firm bought it and hired Ted to restore it in the early 1980s. Pillins' wife was a children's librarian here then. One of Pappas' most significant actions here was uncovering the tall, vaulted ceiling with the pinks and golden greens and blues of a Tiffany skylight and the copper roof that had long been covered by a drop ceiling. Likewise, Ted uncovered the light well in the center of the second floor, which had been boarded over and stacked with books. Which sounds like my house. March 1995, the burning of the Friday Musicale was the latest in more than 50 Riverside area arsons, mostly the work of a Calvin Joppy in his mid-30s in the last 2 years. Ted's job was to resurrect a much-loved cultural institution. By 1998, the new auditorium rose in the ghostly outline of the old, its rows of glass chandeliers, intricately granite floors of oak, and stage curtains of rich, plush velvet taking shape in the shape of the lost. And framed in the office is a clock that was found after the fire that was burnt and apparently stopped at something like 5:31 a.m. that morning. This place should look familiar. Old St. Andrew's Episcopal Church was collapsing. Even today, Ted will point out the tower still leans. He replaced the roof and several large ceiling pieces, stained glass windows, the floor, numerous pews and old wood in the tower. Rain came straight into the nave through the holes in the roof, where you guys are sitting. So did pigeons. And Mark remembers homeless people seeking shelter in the abandoned church. Trusses in the ceiling were collapsing and had to be rebuilt. Large steel plates and bolts in between them had to be replaced. As Alan said earlier, Fernandina Beach architect Robert Schuyler designed the church in 1887, and the congregation moved to Arlington in 1957. It left its original church structure behind. The church stood empty for 4 decades. In renovating and repurposing Epping Forest, built, as so many of you I'm sure know, by the DuPonts in 1927, Ted also designed the new yacht club's fitness center walkway and swimming pool, in keeping with the original stucco walls and red clay tile roof, as well as the gatehouse, which shares architectural idioms like lion's heads with the mansion. But the biggest challenges Ted faced in the renovation were increasing dining capacity and installing central air conditioning. You want to put air conditioning in an old building, of course, Ted says, and most people just drop the ceiling and put the AC behind it by way of explanation. He points to the magnificent coffered ceiling with its massive oak beams and intricately hand-painted stenciling and floral patterns, arabesques and winding serpents. Capital brackets show Green Man motifs. So, Ted designed a series of cabinets, some now fronted with wine racks, to nestle unnoticed against the walls and hold the air conditioning. He designed extra dining room space out back and moved the terrace and surrounding balustrade toward the river. Inside the addition, barrel vaults extend toward the river and end in arched windows that punctuate a wall of glass and a thin steel framework. He converted the former master bedroom to a banquet room and added a grand staircase with multiple turns of stairs and landings. The Bowles School, built as the San Jose Hotel in 1927, prides itself on being one of the most prestigious private schools in Florida with strong academics and special regard for athletics. Throughout much of the 1980s and 90s, Ted Pappas was the school's primary architect, spearheading more than 40 projects, ranging from the restoration of the original hotel building, now Bowles Hall, to the design of the Stein Fine Arts Center and Lynch Theater, most of the Whitehurst Lower School campus, the Olympic-sized swimming pool, and the school's football stadium. In the Fine Arts building, Ted speaks of trying to do two things at once. He wanted to break up the monotony, grand and lovely as it was, of the Florida land boom's lingering Mediterranean revival influence, but echo that influence in arches and arcades with cleaner lines and concrete. Ted's work at Bowles spans the central portion of his career, including significant historic preservation work and conscientious contemporary design. But Ted has also done extensive work in Northwest Jacksonville. His relationship with Edward Waters University, the oldest historically black college in Florida, spans most of his career. Ted first worked with Edward Waters in 1976. In 1987, he restored the historic B.F. Lee Seminary building, which is on the far side from me. And in 1991, he restored historic Centennial Hall itself. He designed the Adams-Jenkins Sports and Music Complex in 2004, even the new football stadium in 2020. In the late 1980s, Ted designed the redevelopment of Brentwood, the city's first public housing project. Later, he developed a prototype for Habijack's housing in the area, incorporating design elements listed by nearby residents with whom he met. These projects led to some of the most significant pieces of architecture and economic investment in this part of Northwest Jacksonville for years: the North Point Town Center at the convergence of Moncrief Road and Myrtle Avenue. His libraries could be a whole show by themselves. His solo library designs include Regency Square Branch Library in 1972, the Charles Webb Westconnett Regional Library in 1974, where I had my first job after a week at Long John Silver Seafood, where I couldn't master the hush puppies. And finally, the Beaches Branch Library in 1983. So, this is Regency, these are West West Connect, and this is the Beaches Branch. Ted says, building's interior determines its exterior, and its primary purpose or function dictates the rest. In his design for the Webb West Connect Library, Ted included a plant-filled interior courtyard open to sunlight and air. In each of these designs, the reading room ceilings span overhead in a chessboard of light squares. With the Beaches Library, Ted explored his fascination with the golden ratio. The center of each concrete panel on the facade features a horizontal staccato at a right angle to the fluting that bookmarks the sections on either side. The fluting mimics that of columns on ancient Greek temples, Ted says, which adds movement and keeps them from looking so bulky. At the top of each staccato stands an antefix with a palmette motif or anthemion, which Ted adopted as his signature. Curious, how many people remember this building being there? Ted's longtime friend, Doug Milne, remembers the day he and Ted first walked into the abandoned hair company building, originally designed by Clyde Harris. There was a sign on it, Doug says, so we called the broker. He let us in. Now, this was a 2-story building, and Ted immediately envisions how he can make it a 3-story building without altering the exterior. With front windows 20 feet high, Ted told Doug how they could add a second and third level that floated. The floor is not reaching all the way to the walls. Ted always worked from the inside out. On wilder and more natural sites in the mountains or at the beach, the outer wilderness came in. At the Milne Pappas building city center, the stone exterior yielded interior soft yellow cypress and house plants in corners and corridors. Photos of the front lobby show house plants, exposed pipes, internal porthole windows, blinds, architectural cast-offs like corbels from older historic structures, and dark plush carpets. Ted fought the loss of his artistic home and headquarters for a decade. On April 6, 2002, Florida Times Union's David Bauerlein wrote, State Department of Transportation's long and costly march to clear the way for a wider Riverside Avenue took another stride this week with the demolition of Jacksonville architect Ted Pappas' former office. It was done so quickly, Ted said, and all your experiences run through your mind, so many wonderful experiences of just seeing the environment for those experiences demolished in a matter of minutes. Oh, it was devastating. At one point, as the Pappas family watched, the interior of the building opened up wide in the lights of the night. It was an irony. Ted always said the interior determined the exterior. Now the opposite crashed in, and the demolition machinery ripped open the interior and exposed to the night that sensuously curved blonde cypress stairway. That stairway had always been central, showcased in the fisheye lens. The curved, soft hardwood of the building within a building of rectangular stone. Since then, of course, there's been talk narrowing this part of Riverside Avenue once again. Meanwhile, the massive stones that clad the outside of the building are still around. They're on an abandoned lot downtown where I personally sometimes make a pilgrimage as though to commune with the spirit of the place. Here, we're looking at just a few of Ted's residential designs over the years. That includes the Mountain House outside Saluda, North Carolina. Built in 1957. The Megas House at the opposite corner in Arlington, built in 1968. The Katz Residence, since demolished at the beaches, built in 1974. That's at the top far corner, and right here is an interior. The Williams Residence in the Hillcrest Hyde Park area of Jacksonville, built in 1979. That's the top center. And the Wilk Residence in Mandarin, bottom center, built in 1987. Ted's very first built architectural design was the Mountain House, built over a stream, in many ways reminiscent to Frank Lloyd Wright, but already Ted Pappas. Ted designed the house with a flat roof, which somebody told him was crazy to do, but it functioned as an early green roof with moss, another instance of blending with its natural landscape. The first roof lasted 50 years. The Megas House clearly incorporates writing principles. Thin bands of floor-to-ceiling front windows stand between four wide banks of sand-colored brick to either side of two widely protruded yellow brick stanchions, a set of wide double doors in the center, all capped with wonderfully wide prairie-influenced eaves. Like the pyramid at Tree Hill, which Ted also designed, the A-frame of the Williams Residence, built in 1979, seems born of its location in the trees. Built on a slight slope so that the back frame of the house is taller than the front. Birches and pines reflect in the glass 2.5 stories from the deck. Even within this expanse of glass, though it invites the outside in, the overhanging, steeply pitched eaves give the interior privacy. The prows facing cardinal points on the Wilk Residence recall Ted's earlier design of Resurrection Catholic Church, but they also echo Frank Lloyd Wright's Unitarian Meeting House in Madison, Wisconsin. You can see, he says, how the spaces are thrust outwards to the exterior on an axis with a gable roof line. Not only is the outside brought in, but your vision is thrust to the outside. When we refer to the destruction of the box, this is still a Ted Pappas quote, which some of you may recognize, that just sounds like him. We imagine this image looking from the exterior onto the box, but the movement of the space is from the inside out, sounding on a theme that he's practiced his entire career. He says, the majority of architecture is taking big boxes and breaking them into little boxes. We want to eliminate the boxes and set things in motion. It's about squeezing and shaping voids. It's the art of the in. So this image was from the Florida Times-Union from last week. Hopefully, I know many of you saw that. The idea here in the 1990s was to create a Jacksonville Central Park, crossing several blocks between Monroe and Duval Streets, from just south of St. John's Cathedral at Market Street to James Weldon Johnson Park at the center of the city. Not only would the design create a green swath and public commons throughout the heart of town, but it buried 2 levels of parking underneath, eliminating the perceived need for more garages. So, you can see why. In 50 years, Doug Milne predicts, Ted Pappas will be remembered as a person people should have listened to even more and paid more attention to in terms of the vision for the city. Perhaps what's astounded Steve Williams, and I know he wanted to be here tonight but could not, most about Ted is the way he has stayed inspired. One of the things we've missed as a city these last 50 years is not listening to Ted Pappas more, Steve says. We too often missed out on his vision even when he offered it to us for free. Yet, after seeing the Milne Pappas building demolished, Ted's inspiration continued. Steve says he couldn't comprehend it, but considers such inspiration the energy that fuels a visionary. Thank you. So I'm going to invite my friend Mark Pappas up. Mark, many of you know, has had a variety of positions with his father's firm over the years. I don't know, I think of him as Ted's right-hand man. You say that on the website. He's also a pretty janitor. Yeah. He's also a pretty darn good writer. But please do not ask him his opinion of Ayn Rand. So I'm going to turn this over to Mark, and then I'm sure there are a million questions that people would like to ask of Ted Pappas, and we'll move into that section. So here's Mark.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Gilmore, this has been a really fun evening and exciting time. There's been so much energy about the book coming out. The stories that have been in the press has just been really amazing. And I've been asked several times recently, what it's been like to work with such a creative luminary of Jacksonville, a real legend. And you kind of take a second, you take stock and talk about 500 projects and over 20 major projects, and really just your fingerprints all over Jacksonville and the history of Jacksonville. Wait a second, I'm not sure who you think I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about Tim. Tim is amazing, and it has been just an incredible honor for Dad and I to be able to work with him, to see the projects kind of fresh through his eyes, which it's just an amazing experience. And Tim really is, the greatest living and otherwise historian in Jacksonville. So I can't say enough how much that experience has been. I did have a small contribution to the book that Tim gives me a lot more credit than I deserve. Talking about Dad's involvement, his leadership, things like that. And it was important, I think, to get that into the book. It's funny though, Tim gave us a lot of leeway that you don't normally get through authors. And for instance, the acknowledgments we just hijacked from him, and it became an opportunity for Ted to say thank you to so many people, family, co-workers, staff, associates, contemporaries, many of who are here tonight. This room is full of incredible architects and people in the built environment. And that means a lot to Dad to be here. As some of you know, he's long been involved in the American Institute of Architects early on in his career, from the local level to the state to the national. He was president of all levels of that, and that meant a lot to him. It was a way for him to give back to the profession, but I think more than anything, it was a way to help energize him by working with his contemporaries. I mean, there's obviously people in here that we've competed with over the years and who've beaten us out for jobs, and hopefully maybe grabbed a few, but I think he gets so much from his contemporaries and being able to give back to the profession which he so loves. Having said that, I think, as Tim brought up with the park concept, which really is still out there, has evolved, was a One Spark project back in the 2010s and did quite well. The horizontal environment is as important to Ted as whatever he can build vertically. And he's always tried, when possible, to mesh those things and bring it together. And even today, the last, from COVID on, he has been really working focused with a number of people who are here tonight on trying to build the park system in Jacksonville. They've come up with a lot of conceptual things. It's not something that would lead to projects for him, but it's more about creating a better community. It's not always just a building that needs to go there. He's fully engaged with that. But having said that, we're still doing some cool things, and he inspires me. And right now, it's amazing to think. This was one of the first projects that he brought me in to assist with as a kind of junior project manager. But just looking at it today, we're working with some of the great spiritual spaces in Jacksonville. The Good Shepherd Church, the Episcopal Cathedral, the Mount Zion AME Church, St. Philip's Episcopal Church. All these are restoration type projects, things like that, and that's just been a really, really cool thing. But I don't really think you'll want to hear me talk much more. We can bring Tim back, because I think they might want to talk to him a little bit, and the man himself is back there as well. So thank you all for being here.
Where is Ted? There he is. I kind of think I should just get out of the way. That be okay? So I know there's a million questions, so I don't know. Whoever has a question for Ted, I'll move out of the way and let him talk to you.
Thank you, Tim, and I appreciate very much everyone coming tonight. It means a lot to me. I've known many people in here that for years and years. Nick Singus' dad and I worked on the building committee of the First Church, and he's here. There are so many other people, my wife, my family, granddaughter. Anyhow, it's too much to say. It's an unusual feeling to just have a lot of people come out, and I've always appreciated the contribution of so many people to Jacksonville, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. So thank you for coming, and thank you for staying, and thank you for coming through the rain. I appreciate it. So there's food in the back of the room there, and there are a lot of... Yes, ma'am, Nancy Powell, the leader.
Explain your vision for Bay Street.
For
your vision for Bay Street?
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. Nancy Powell and Susan Caven and several others that are here tonight. Scenic Jackson, River Parks Now, which we've been working for 3 years. We all know that there's a lot going on near the football stadium. Mr. Kahn has started that movement, and there is a lot of buy-in to developing that park, Metropolitan Park, Mosh, all the way into downtown. And the one connector, the one umbilical cord between the old Jacksonville, which is downtown, and the new Jacksonville, which is developing with Shad Khan and that complex, is Bay Street. And Bay Street, I believe, would be a wonderful boulevard. We should call it Bay Boulevard. It connect all the way from the stadium into downtown, all the way around to Riverside Avenue, which forms this great park. And I think it would be a wonderful thing to have it tree lined. We talk about this so much. we don't have to plant trees now, and maybe someone will realize it in 50 years or whatever. But anyhow, that's a great opportunity that I think we have. We were lucky to have the mayor of Charleston, Riley, and when he came to speak to our meeting of, what do we call it, Nancy? Great City Symposium, which Mark came up with the words. He was so kind and so appreciative, and as he was leaving, I went to his car with him, and he looked at me and says, "Ted, Jacksonville has a world-class river." And I certainly believe that, and I think all of us in this room believe that, and we surely need to celebrate it, and where visitors can come and really see the beauty of a city that has a river running through it. Yes. Yes, sir.
In 1980, some folks from Chattanooga, Tennessee, Hamilton County, and the aides got together and formed Vision 2000. I had left Somerville, Georgia, Chattanooga in 1971, and sometime in the 80s, Chattanooga was said by Walter Cronkite, I think, to be the dirtiest city he'd ever seen. I went back up there to Northwest Georgia and Eastern Tennessee in 2011 and again since then, and that whole area around the river from their Vision 2000 had been totally redeveloped, and they had an old bridge that they decided not to drop, and it's now a pedestrian bridge, and I'm not sure, I was trying to do some research before I came to this meeting as to how that happened, but can you see any project? Oh, and it was just this total downtown. I'm not even sure how it happened, but I just know what it was. And it really incorporates the Tennessee River. You think about that like that here?
Riverfront Parks now has been studying Chattanooga, and Nancy, why don't you stand up a minute and just tell everybody about our event coming up?
Well, Mayor Littlefield from Chattanooga was at our last year's Great City Symposium, and so it's a long story, but they decided that they were an industrial river, which most rivers were working industrial rivers, and they needed to clean it up from a pollution standpoint. And they decided to focus on it, public access, public park. They have an aquarium there, and so they just really focus on that as a revitalization strategy, and that's part of one of the benchmarks that we have followed. And we've looked at other cities, and Chattanooga has been one of those that inspired us.
Tennessee Aquarium.
Yeah. Not that we think an aquarium is the answer necessarily, but the Museum of Science is one example, so that's going to be a part of that. So having a cultural attraction in addition to public access, we'd love to see a pedestrian bridge. I would love to see that.
I would also like to thank Doug Milley. We've been friends for a long time, and many of Doug's real estate visions included me, and a lot of the projects that you saw here, Duval High School, Seminole Club, many others, even Annual we tried to get worked out. But he's been a long-time friend and also really has done a lot for the city. He's a great historian of Jacksonville. So Doug, thank you. Finish up with this. I was having lunch a couple, 3 weeks ago and ran into Mrs. Haskell, Joan Haskell, and she was sitting there, and she said to me, Preston's working on a book now too, and he stays up at 4 o'clock every morning, so you'll have to see that book. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for making it out on a steamy, rainy September 1st evening in this 21st century Jacksonville. And thanks for giving this great Jacksonville citizen, Ted Pappas, a warm greeting and a message of appreciation. Appreciate your engagement with the topics of Jacksonville history. Ted and his son Mark will be around, as will Dr. Gilmore, and more books available to purchase and sign. I'm pretty sure we can arm twist Tim into signing a few more. So stick around and feel free to make yourselves at home for a bit. We're so glad to have you with us enjoying this great church. Thank you.